The following announcement has been paid for by Perched on the Top Rope.
What's up, guys? This is the Murderhawk Monster Lance Archer, and you are watching Perched on the Top Rope. And watch out, because I'll chokeslam you on the way down.
Welcome, everyone, to Perched on the Top Rope. I am your host, former dirt sheet writer from Ringside News, Daily DDT, the Sportster, the Richest, and Sportskita. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Lee Walker. And today's episode isn't about news. It's not an interview. It's not talking action figures. It's something that I've been very vocal about. It's something that we've heard other popular podcasters such as Eric Bischoff and JD from NY talk about. It's AEW. That's right, you're getting a show about AEW, but AEW fans might not like the show because of how I'm going to put AEW in the limelight. And I don't even think someone like Eric Bischoff will like this show, because I'm going to make the comparison that AEW is that of a dying WCW in its dying days. And I'm going to draw a lot of comparisons as to why I feel that way. So sit back and enjoy as I dig deep into the comparison of WCW and AEW. In my first comparison of AEW being very similar to WCW is the bloated/inflated rosters. Now, one situation WCW always struggled with was the fact that they had a bloated/inflated roster, as the company had brought so many wrestlers into WCW over the years, which is very similar to what AEW has already done. Tony Khan has wasted no time in signing as many talents as possible, whether they were big names or whether they were people for the future. Now, there isn't enough television for all the wrestlers that Tony has signed, even across all of the shows that AEW has. You got to think about it. AEW Dynamite, Collision, Rampage, and don't forget the fact that Tony Khan has Ring of Honor as well. Now, it's a situation that many fans and even former WCW stars, such as Booker T, have compared to Eric Bischoff's WCW. Now, you want to talk about a bloated roster. AEW has something over 150 talents. And the fact that AEW only has 3 shows, you're not getting all 150 some odd talents on the shows. Now, if you include Ring of Honor, now you've got 4 shows, but they have seemingly their own roster, and you're not getting them all on. So, a lot of people sit at home. A lot of people don't have anything to do. Like, where's Danhausen? Haven't seen Danhausen. He's an AEW superstar, but I haven't seen him. Haven't seen him in a while. Now, when WCW had a bloated roster, it was Nitro, Thunder, and 2 Saturday shows. There was a Saturday morning show for a little bit, and then you had the regular WCW Saturday night at 6:05. So in a way, you can compare the two because they had such a big roster that talents weren't getting used, talents were unhappy, and Tony Khan ends up buying Ring of Honor and taking a lot of AEW stars over there. But across 3 shows, you don't have a lot of people getting airtime. And it shows because you start wondering where certain talents are because you don't see them. For example, I had honestly thought that Soraya was done with AEW. Didn't even realize she was part of the company anymore. I assumed she was just sitting at home. But that's not the case because she's been primarily just on Rampage. But if you don't catch Rampage, you don't know. If you don't catch AEW Collision on Saturday, you don't know. If you're seeing the same people for the most part on AEW Dynamite, where they're trying to keep the majority of the big storylines, where the second and third liners of storylines, the mid card, low mid card people, they're regulated to Rampage and Collision. And Rampage, in my opinion, doesn't really have any storylines because it's only an hour show. So with that many people, there's not enough shows, and there's not enough talent there. Or I'm sorry, there's not enough shows for what they have for talent, and it doesn't work. Now, my next example is WCW. The next comparison, WCW liked putting on big shows when they could, and AEW has seemingly done the same. So WCW is drawing huge audiences regularly that allowed for them to tour the world and put on shows with great crowds. That is something that AEW at the time had done well. I mean, still doing well. Having gone to some major venues. Example, Wembley Stadium for 2 years in a row. Granted, the first show compared to the second show sold a lot less tickets, but I'm going to get into that a little later on. By doing this, both companies made it feel like it was a big deal. Because of that, as the packed houses have made every show important and given off the vibe that they're just as big as WWE, which WCW, I'll say, had done a very good job at. AEW, with Wembley, has done a good job too. Great matches and everything. However, the difference between the numbers in 2023 and 2024 were completely different, which is where I'm going to get more into the fact that AEW is just like WCW. But, they have had big shows, and Wembley Stadium is one of them. And WCW, prime example, that one WCW Nitro with Hogan versus Goldberg drew 40,000 people. So they're doing very good as far as that goes. Now, my next comparison, where AEW is just like AEW is just like WCW, and fans are going to argue this one all day long, but ladies and gentlemen, it's the fact that both companies, AEW and WCW, took and brought in a lot of former WWE superstars. And that's something WCW had done quite a bit of with WCW Nitro. Obviously, Tony Khan and AEW have done the same thing. And it was something that WCW did a lot to bring in former WWE superstars when they were made available after their contracts had ended, which constantly added huge star power to the roster. That is a technique that Tony Khan has followed up with, as they have signed a lot of former WWE talents. Bryan Danielson, Tony Storm, I'm even going to say CM Punk, Keith Lee, Adam Cole. They did have the perfect 10, but he's Shawn Spears. He is somebody that is now back in WWE. FTR, Chris Jericho, Paul White, Mark Henry. The list can go on and on. Adam Copeland, Saraya, Ruby Riott, Athena, who was Ember Moon in WWE. Tony Khan had just done exactly what Eric Bischoff had done. And you're seeing those examples right here, right now. Everything that I'm showing and explaining to you is everything that WCW had done. So is that why Eric Bischoff is so mad at AEW and Tony Khan? Because he's seeing the mistakes all over again? One thing I'm very big on is you can sign all the former WWE talent all you want. My question is do the fans care? Now, the way Eric Bischoff had done it, Eric had made the NWO and used a lot of former WWE talents to be part of the NWO and made the NWO the biggest and hottest commodity faction in professional wrestling history. And you're not going to tell me otherwise, because here we are nearly 30 years later and we're still talking about the NWO, and I personally cannot say that we're going to do that about WWE's factions of the Bloodline or AEW's faction of the House of Black. Do you think we'll be talking about them in 30 years? Because personally, I don't. But the NWO, nearly 30 years later, we're still talking about, and it is one of the best factions in the world still, to this day. Tony Khan has done the same thing, just picked off every WWE talent that he could for the most part. Now, where it's different, a lot of the stars that WCW had taken were top stars. Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Macho Man Randy Savage. AEW, WWE hasn't really released their top stars, so to speak. So AEW is getting more of mid-card names. Now, there is names like Adam Copeland, who fans we know as Edge in WWE. But there's been a shift between 1996 and 2024. And what I mean by that is during the Monday Night Wars, when WWF Warzone, Raw as War was on, WCW Nitro was on, you were channel flipping between the two. You were channel flipping between DX and the NWO. You knew all these former WWE stars in WCW, but you still watched because they still had their own homegrown talent, which AEW does too. But again, there's a big difference between the 28 years and Tony Khan trying to make Eric Bischoff's plan work from 28 years ago. The thing is now, is when a WWE superstar leaves WWE, whether they were released or whether, they were terminated, whether they, asked to be let go, the fan base does not fully follow from WWE over like it would have with WWE to WCW, because you had the channel flipping of the Monday Night Wars. We don't have that with AEW being on Wednesday nights and WWE Raw being on Monday. So you don't get that anymore. You don't get that channel flipping where the other talent might matter just a little bit more. So now if someone like Adam Copeland leaves WWE, Edge, and goes to AEW, the full fan base isn't following. Soraya leaves WWE, Paige, and goes to AEW. Fan base does not fully follow. Amber Moon leaves WWE and is now at Ring of Honor under AEW. She's now Athena. All the fans didn't follow. FTR, all the fans didn't follow. Are you catching my drift here? Are you catching what I'm putting on to you, the fans? That the WWE fan base and the fans of these wrestlers, they didn't fully follow. And I'm going to say it's because they weren't, I don't want to say true fans of that wrestler or of that sports entertainer, if you will. They're more of a machine behind WWE. Now, I watch all forms of wrestling. And if all of Saraya, Ruby Riott, FTR, Adam Copeland, Christian, if all of their fans followed them from WWE over, then AEW would seemingly have better ratings, if I'm not mistaken. That's the way I'm looking at this. So when Adam Copeland debuted on AEW Dynamite and the ratings were only 700 and some odd thousand, should have been more. CM Punk debuts in AEW had million views for a while. So this is something that both WCW and AEW have practiced when it comes to taking names from WWE to come to their company. The only difference is it worked for WCW for a while. It is not working for AEW. Now, my next comparison might seem like a stretch to some fans, but it's really not. This is something that even WWF was doing in the early 90s, but WCW had also opened the forbidden door, just like AEW has, and WCW's forbidden door opened in 1995. They had worked with New Japan Pro Wrestling, and just like AEW, they're doing the same thing. And one of the most popular aspects to AEW is, in fact, the AEW Forbidden Door element, which Tony Khan, happily working with other promotions for one-off moments or longer storylines. This brings element of unpredictability and has also set up some major matches for the company. But it's not unique to them, though, as WCW had often worked with New Japan Pro Wrestling to put on major events, such as the Collision in North Korea. They had events in Japan with WCW, even in the early 90s. So the idea of the Forbidden Door isn't something new, actually, as WCW is also doing it. After all, WCW had their own faction of the NWO in Japan. I mean, it seemingly started in Japan and then, trickled its way to America, but Americans will tell you that the NWO first started in America. Scott Norton, Buff Bagwell were in New Japan Pro Wrestling going over to work with their NWO of Muda and Chono. So the fact that AEW is running this Forbidden Door pay-per-view, yeah, folks, it's just like WCW, when WCW would invite New Japan Pro Wrestling to Nitro. And you can even listen to our interview with Vince Russo talking about having New Japan Pro Wrestling be part of their events, youtube.com/perched on the top rope. Now, another similarity between WCW and AEW is the financial backing. Now, I'm sure you're sitting here saying to yourself, well, how are they similar? The financial backing that the two had, WCW being wealthy and that AEW can compare is because Tony Khan has secured great deals for his company alongside the wealth coming from his own family. They can compete with WWE in terms of bringing in big contracted wrestlers, and they can put in huge effort into the design and production aspects of the shows, which provide slightly more polished look, which is also something WCW always had. Even in its dying days, WCW still had a good production. And now this is where I'm really going to make comparisons. This Wednesday, AEW will surpass WCW in the, and I quote, 83 weeks, which WCW had, beaten WWE in the ratings. However, Dynamite will now have more episodes than what WCW had for Nitro this coming week. Which, that's great. But I can tell you that WCW had a lot more memorable moments than what AEW has had. Now, my comparisons to AEW and WCW, that of the dying days of WCW, this one's kind of foolish, but I'm first going to look at the video game aspect. When WCW started having issues, they had already been into the video game world, as they had WCW versus the World Tour for N64. Great game, by the way. And then followed up with WCW versus NWO Revenge. Phenomenal, which we later saw more games being recreated for WWF, though. But when the video games started to flounder, if you will, games like Nitro, WCW Nitro, WCW Thunder, still like seemingly at the height of the popularity of WCW, but it was going down at this point, and the games were not good. And then following Nitro and Thunder, they switched the games and the aspects, and we had WCW Mayhem, and we had WCW Backstage Assault, which would be the last WCW game. And they were absolutely fucking terrible video games. Just absolutely terrible. Which AEW put out their first video game using Ukes, who created and helped produce the two great WCW games, including Revenge for the N64. Problem is, the AEW game sucks. You feel like you have an unfinished game. And when you compare it to other wrestling games in its genre right now, which is really WWE, but you also have Fire Pro Wrestling, and there's a bunch of other wrestling games on Steam like Retromania and a wide variety of other games on there. I just, off the top of my head, I can't really list them because I don't play them, so I don't know like the names of them. But like, I have one on my Xbox One, and it's a great game. It's a lot of fun to play. And it was the one that was meant for, oh god, if I tell you, it was like it was for a Japanese company. But it's a lot of fun. And again, fans, I have to apologize. I am having a drink while I'm on here. It's not alcoholic beverage. I just have a cold, and if I keep talking, I'm going to cough. I'm trying not to cough, so I have to take a sip. My comparison here with the video games, people are going to be like, this is really, really bad. But it's not, because when you start putting out a bad product that people are paying for, people are going to take notice. And people took notice. People took notice with the WCW video games. just like right now, people are taking it into consideration of the AEW video game Fight Forever. Now, Fight Forever has one really cool aspect to me, and it was Stadium Stampede, where you can go online and play in like a Fortnite-like type battle royal. However, when you go to get online to play that game, there is no, how do I say it? There's no one online. I go to play Stadium Stampede, I'm playing against literally 30 PCU computer people. That is not fun, to be honest with you. I got online to play against people online, but there's no one ever to play online against because, again, quite frankly, the game's not fun to play. So that's a comparison that I have constantly made, that people look at me and be like, you're comparing video games as to why AEW is very similar to WCW. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Because I've noticed that no one's playing the AEW game. And when the game came out, a lot of fans were disappointed. And you'd even have to look, but I want to tell you, ratings started to drop once the game came out and the game sucked. WCW faced the same things when their game sucked. They made such a big deal about how good these games were and advertising and this and that, and the games were flops. This was the same thing, and this was supposed to be backed by Kenny Omega, who was like a big gamer and everything, but the game's a flop. So that's a big comparison that I have made myself when it comes to AEW being very similar to the dying days of WCW. Now, the other two go hand in hand. And why do the other two go hand in hand? It's simple. They go hand in hand because without fans, you can't be in big arenas. And if you're not filling up big arenas, then you're seemingly going somewhere else, to smaller venues. So the dying days of WCW compared to AEW right now is the fact that AEW has started to run smaller venues because of poor ticket sales. Now, this is exactly what the dying days of WCW would do. WCW started running smaller venues because ticket sales were declining. And AEW has recently just started doing that as well. And you notice that they're doing it. If you watch Dynamite, Rampage, Collision, first off, they only show you the one side of the cam. They don't show you the whole arena anymore. 2, one thing that AEW and WCW have done when it came to running smaller arenas and things to that nature is you'll notice that they black out sections with the carpets and they lower the lighting so you can't see the crowd. And they're doing that because there's a lack of crowd at these shows. Now, one of the reasons why I said Eric Bischoff wouldn't like the show of making this a complete comparison is because Eric Bischoff mocks the AEW comparisons, and I'll even fill in here a little bit. When asked about it, Bischoff couldn't help but laugh off these comparisons and said, when Tony Khan makes comparisons and tries to compare AEW and Tony Khan's approach to the business to WCW, I just laugh. Adding more about WCW's troubled past, even 95, 96, 97, 98, and yes, even 97 with the wheels falling off and flying down the highway, sparks flying, everything else that was going on. They aren't even within striking distance where WCW was before eventually crashing. And Tony Khan is right here. Eric Bischoff is right here. And the reason for that is because where the ratings were 28 years ago were much higher than the ratings of today. If during the Monday Night Wars, WCW hitting under 1 million, that would be devastating. In the fact, I don't even think that happened during the Monday Night Wars because there were so many people watching. Now you have less people watching, but you have other ways that they're watching. You have different streaming services that you can watch from. And of course, there's always going to be those people that are looking for a free stream, even for Dynamite, Rampage, and Collision. WCW didn't have to deal with that back then. WCW, WWF, ECW, they didn't have to deal with pirated websites offering the shows for free if you didn't have cable or pay-per-view. So is that affecting ratings today? Yes, absolutely. But I know Eric Bischoff doesn't like the comparisons, but how can you not when they are both very, very similar? And another note is between WCW and AEW had actually happened April of 2024 when commentators and fans compared the Elite's assault on Tony Khan with an NWO story like involving Jack Perry that drew attentions to the similarities in storytelling, but at the same time highlighted vast differences in the sizes and implications of these two wrestling organizations. I, for one, see the comparisons all day long. And like I said, I think Eric Bischoff doesn't like the fact that AEW is being compared to WCW because it's something he has to relive all over again. Now, nobody wants to see any company fail, but is AEW failing? Yes and no. And it all boils down to numbers. You can't tell me that the company's successful when ticket sales have constantly been declining. You're running smaller arenas. You are having problems with action figures, just like WCW did, by the way. WCW never actually had, in my opinion, a really good action figure line in any line that they had ever created. Now AEW has Jazzwares, but there's rumors that they could be done with Jazzwares soon. They're having issues with getting figures out. I mean, it was almost a year later and AEW still had CM Punk figures to be released. It's a little wild to me. That's something you wouldn't see in WCW. It's something you wouldn't see in WWE. It's something you wouldn't see in ECW. But obviously there's an issue here where that's happening. Now, again, the ticket sales and the arenas all boils down to the fact that you can put on great matches, but you also have to have good storytelling. And that is something that a dying days of WCW lacked, especially because of bringing in, I don't want to say especially because of bringing in Vince Russo, but there was obviously an issue there where storytelling was not good for WCW, and it wasn't good for AEW. It's actually one of the biggest problems that the casual wrestling fan has with AEW. But Tony Khan has expressed it multiple times. He is a different form of wrestling. He's not for everybody. And that's great, but if you're only going to cater to a certain fan base, then the more you cater to just one particular fan base, you're going to alienate fans and cause them not to watch. And I think that's what we're seeing here. But I also think it's a huge effect of AEW not having storylines. And WCW struggled with that, especially because of creative control. AEW did the same thing with creative control. Wrestlers have creative control in their contracts. That's why you don't see house shows with AEW. They can go and work indie shows and make more money, where if they got to work house shows for AEW right now, they're not getting paid any different. And I think that's a shame that AEW can't put on house shows. But when you have a decline in ticket sales so much, they're basically just a TV company. And that's all they are. And WCW was the same exact way, folks. They were basically just a TV company because they did not do a lot of house shows. I'll say this, they've done a lot more than what AEW has been able to do. But WCW did not run a lot of house shows. That was always a big WWE thing. House shows, always got to be going. Now, I wish I could pull up ticket sales for you on particular events when it comes to AEW. I've done this on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/perched on the top rope, where certain specialty events I had posted about, where you can see the ticket sales for certain events, and over the years you can see that ticket sales have gone down. Prime example would be like Revolution, Forbidden Door. Another great example would be AEW All In Wembley Stadium. The first year was 80,000 tickets. The next year it's 54,000 tickets. And that's not good, but a lot of fans will say, well, that's a lot of tickets. It is a lot of tickets, but it's because it was in Wembley Stadium in England. There's no way AEW is getting 80,000 people in a stadium in the United States, let alone, my honest opinion, 50,000 people in the United States for a show now. And a prime example of that is one of the AEW pay-per-views, All Out, that follows All In. In 2021, they had, get this, 10,000 people for the pay-per-view for 2001. For All Out 2002, they had 8,527 people. All right, little drop. They have a resurgence in 2023 with 9,826 people, but in 2024, it drops to 9,000. Now, I'm going to give another example of another pay-per-view of numbers dropping. Now, a better idea of this, folks, is a show that actually just recently happened. AEW Grand Slam. Now, AEW Grand Slam was generally just on AEW Dynamite as a specialty show, and this year it was Dynamite and Collision. However, the inaugural AEW Dynamite Grand Slam event had 20,177 people there. In 2022, they only had 12,000. In 2023, 8,636. And this past AEW Dynamite and Collision Grand Slam had a total of 8,191 people. So, fans, that is a lot of downfall there. Now, when it comes to AEW right now. AEW's been called out for potential malpractice after Grand Slam 2024's ticket sales witnessed sudden surge. So what's going on? AEW Dynamite Grand Slam and taped Collision Grand Slam 2024 from Arthur Ashe Stadium. According to recent reports, there have been some suspicion about the show's ticket sales. Dynamite Grand Slam had some great matchups like Jon Moxley versus Darby Allin, Nigel McGuinness versus Bryan Danielson, and also a shocking debut of former WWE superstar MVP. The show's attendance has been an emerging topic, as according to WrestleTix, the company sold 2,669 tickets earlier in the week to bring the final attendance to 8,191 with a total setup of 8,477. In a recent edition of the Wrestling Observer Radio, Dave Meltzer noted how AEW sold 2,000 tickets in a few days, which raised questions about the company's potential using paid attendees. Meltzer also spoke about how the promotion might have given away some complimentary tickets to fill the seats. I don't know how much the paid was. When you get 3,000 in the last couple days, you know what I mean? Question mark? That's a lot. It was over 8,000 in the building, though. Now, Conan says Tony Khan could be looking to protect his image after the AEW Warner Brothers Discovery rumors. So what is that? Warner Brothers Discovery and AEW deal is reportedly in the final stages. Meanwhile, according to WCW veteran Conan, Tony Khan would do everything in his power to make himself look good after the actual announcement. Tony Khan has hinted before that the Warner Brothers Discovery deal could make the company the second most profitable wrestling promotion of all time, and the 4-year deal was expected to be worth $170 million annually. In a recent edition of Keeping It 100, the official podcast with Conan, Conan accuses Tony Khan of inflating numbers to save his company's reputation. They got a bit more, right? I'm sure that's not what they were looking for. And on top of that, I still stand by my statement, and I could be absolutely wrong. And this is not being a hater. I wouldn't doubt if they gave him $120 million. Khan didn't put in some of his own money so he wouldn't look bad. He said, Warner Brothers Discovery has been AEW's media right partner since the inception of the promotion in 2019. So it will be interesting to see if those two parties announce a deal in the coming weeks. Now, Swerve Strickland had said that AEW was going to Fox. So we're going to have to wait and see about that. But I wanted to give a better example of declining ticket sales. And the best example I can give is AEW Grand Slam with such a declining rate, from going from 20,000 at its first event to a mere 8,100, and a rumor that over 2,000 tickets were basically given away. So really you're looking at 6,000 people if that's going to be the case. So, is AEW and WCW the dying days very similar? Absolutely. Are they different? Absolutely. But only time will tell what will happen to AEW. Do I personally want to see AEW go out of business? No, I don't want to see any wrestling company go out of business. But to sit there and to say that they are not similar would simply be a lie. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Perched on the Top Rope. You can go to youtube.com/perched on the top rope and watch all our unboxing videos, wrestling interviews, including AEW's very own Lance Archer. We also have tons of interviews with TNA talents from Brian Myers, Eddie Edwards, Moose, Jordan Grace, Jay Vidal. Hey, there's even Will Ospreay on there, Mickey James, even. So go check those out, youtube.com/perched on the top rope. And make sure you go to Apple Podcast, Perched on the Top Rope. Leave us a 5-star review. Do I do it? Bang! Sorry, I had to do the DDP thing. So leave us a 5-star review, and if you don't like video and you're at the gym or something, well, you can listen to the audio of those interviews and, of course, shows like this. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/perched on the top rope. 15,000 followers going strong, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. We are on Instagram and Threads. It is Perched on the Top Rope Podcast. We are on X at Perched Top Rope. And you can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/perched on the top rope. I'm randomly on there playing WWE video games. Just like 2K24, all those awesome videos we have on YouTube, it's from there. So go check it out. And fans, remember, spoiler free's the way to be. I'm out.